It's more expensive than ever to rent. In fact, rents were unaffordable in 2024 for almost 25 million households in the United States, an all-time high, according to a report on America's rental housing by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University, released this month. The most astonishing finding highlighted by analysts in the Harvard report is that a huge number of renters are spending their entire paycheck on housing. Are you one of them? A common guideline advises against spending more than 30% of your earnings on housing costs. If you spend more than a third of your income on rent, you're considered to be moderately rent burdened. If you spend 50% of your paycheck on rent, you're considered severely rent burdened by federal standards. However, amidst the worsening housing crisis, millions of Americans are dedicating 100% of their monthly pay towards rent. Can you believe that? That's a tough pill to swallow, and it's a perfect illustration of the decay of the U.S. economy over the past 4 years. No one should spend that much to keep a roof over their heads. Generally, the more you spend on essentials like shelter, that means there's less in your budget to spend on other things, said Kara Ng, a senior economist at Zillow. For workers earning the minimum wage in many large U.S. cities, it's been impossible to keep up with the growth of rent prices. A new report by Clever Real Estate found that the average American has to work 50 hours just to pay their rent. That is an alarming development, financial experts say. 50 hours represents just over 30% of a month's work based on a 40-hour work week. And that's also if they're earning an average hourly wage of $34.59. If not, they will not be able to cover the current median rent, which stands at $1,733 a month. Notably, more than 1 in 5 Americans who earn minimum wages are spending their entire paychecks on rent every month. A Redfin survey exposed that 22% of renters are spending all their income directly on rent, while another 20% are working a second job just to afford it. Renters are also dipping into their retirement funds to keep a roof over their head, with 13% pulling money out and another 12% contributing less to their savings. In California, where rent averages $2,493 a month, a renter would have to work 64.5 hours at $38.63 an hour to be able to pay the rent, the data showed. Meanwhile, in Florida, with an average monthly rent of $2,033, a renter would toil for 63.5 hours at $32.01 an hour to make the rent. And in Texas, where rent averages $1,720 a month, a renter must log 52.9 hours at $32.54 an hour to pay the rent. Clever researchers also noted that in many urban areas, you'd need to earn more than quadruple the federal minimum wage of $7.25 to afford the fair market rent without spending more than 30% of your income on housing or working a second job. In Atlanta, Austin, and Nashville, for instance, median rents are hovering around $1,600 a month. The necessary hourly wage to afford rent in those areas without compromising more than a third of your income is $31.76. In other words, a one-bedroom dwelling would need to be priced at $377 a month for a minimum wage worker to comfortably afford rent. But a unit at that price is extremely hard to come by. Since 2020, rent prices across the country have risen 30.4%, and that's according to an analysis from Zillow and StreetEasy. while the federal minimum wage has remained unchanged since 2009. Some areas have experienced double that growth in rent prices in the last 4 years. Highly desired markets like Staten Island have seen monthly rent prices increase by nearly 60%, from $1,244 to $1,983 over that same period. Today, 74% of U.S. residents earning under $50,000 annually struggle with housing payments, as revealed by Redfin. Among these individuals, 24% have skipped meals, 43% reduced restaurant dining, 36% cut back on vacations, and 25% borrowed money from family or friends to afford housing costs over the past 12 months. Rampant housing costs have been a long-standing problem for the United States, but conditions have become far more complicated after the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates for homebuyers during the pandemic, which caused a shortage of affordable homes and led to more competition for rental units. Rent is commonly the biggest expense in household budgets that have been squeezed by higher prices for essentially all common goods and services over the past few years. For many renters, buying a home is no longer an option after average prices climb to over $400,000, while higher mortgage rates are now adding hundreds of dollars to monthly payments. A separate Redfin study found that the number of renter households is growing 3 times faster than homeowner households, largely because the cost of buying has increased by 47% since the second half of 2020. For decades, the United States hasn't been building enough housing units. The tight housing supply is actually the main factor in the affordability crisis in the for-sale and rental markets. Real estate experts and economists agree that ramping up the supply of housing through new construction is the most effective solution to the nation's housing problem. But home builders have been struggling to ramp up construction levels because inflation has made both materials and labor more expensive, which makes it harder for them to turn a profit. Housing starts, measured by the number of new projects from builders across the country, dropped by 3.1% in the last quarter. In the multifamily sector that includes apartments, condos, and other rental properties, construction fell by 29.3% compared to last year. The shortage of homes is forcing more people to rent and leaving lower-income households more vulnerable to losing their homes to eviction due to missed payments. In 2024, eviction filings were 50% higher than they were pre-pandemic, with millions of minimum wage workers using their entire paycheck to pay their rents. These individuals are one job loss or one medical emergency away from getting evicted. As a matter of fact, this has contributed to the increase in homelessness last year. In the last 12 months, the homeless population of the United States went up by 18.1%. More than 770,000 people lost their place to live, and that's without including vehicle dwellers and people staying with friends or family because they do not have a place of their own. That jump comes on top of a 12% increase in 2023, which the National Low-Income Housing Coalition blamed on soaring rents and the end of pandemic assistance. The increase also is being driven by people experiencing homelessness for the first time. For every 10,000 individuals in America, 23 are chronically homeless. Increased homelessness is the tragic yet predictable consequence of underinvesting in the resources and protections that help people find and maintain safe, affordable housing. Renee Willis, incoming interim CEO of the coalition, said in a statement. As advocates, researchers, and people with lived experience have warned. The number of people experiencing homelessness continues to increase as more people struggle to afford sky-high housing costs. The numbers are just boggling to me. Ann Oliver, CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, stressed, "It's not only extremely difficult to find affordable housing in many cities, but officials have also pushed for harsher laws banning tents and sleeping in public spaces. The underlying conditions driving homelessness are not going in the right direction," National Housing Law Project Executive Director Seamus Roller said during an interview. "Housing affordability is worse. It's affecting more people across the country, and so you can't be surprised that people are essentially falling off the back of the wagon. If resources were effectively deployed to tackle the issue, things could be a whole lot different. The process to get out of the streets is complicated by laws and regulations that people in a state of financial vulnerability often cannot comply with." McFadden told USA Today, "We need to assume that every single person is housing ready. You don't have to pre-qualify by going through some kind of treatment or getting ready to be in a house. If housing officials waived upfront requirements and expanded income eligibility cutoffs for homeless Americans, thousands of people would have a real opportunity to start over. Income verification takes time, and if you've been living on the street or in a van or in a shelter, you might not have immediate access to these documents," said Richard Monocchio, HUD's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Public Housing. "Officials need to presume that these homeless people that don't have housing are eligible for rents. Otherwise, they will not be able to break the cycle of chronic poverty," he emphasized. "It's about giving people breathing room," McFadden continued, "and making it easier for them to access resources they're entitled to." She said when someone's life is consumed by their need for housing, they shouldn't have to be experts in federal statutes and regulations. Javona Brownlee, a 31-year-old single mother of 3, is one amongst millions of people who have been caught in the headwinds of this unprecedented housing crisis. Coupled with unaffordable childcare and the high cost of living, she feels stuck. "Sometimes it feels like a trap." She explains that the cycle of poverty and housing problems that prevents her from putting strong foundations beneath her family's feet. "I've had a decent job. I've worked in banks, in credit unions, but a lot of times I couldn't afford to pay for housing as well as all the other bills." Due to her precarious circumstances, securing a good credit rating, which is essential for applying for rental accommodation, it's been out of her reach, aggravating her family's financial and housing insecurity. She says, "I have overcome a lot, but it's a crazy cycle, and housing is a major issue." Brownlee is fearful that conditions will become even tougher for her in 2025. "I'm afraid. I'm scared," she says. "The rug is already half pulled out from under me." That's a feeling shared by many Americans who feel that they have been betrayed by the system. It's safe to say that if you spend 50% of your income on housing, you've been betrayed by the system. If you spend your entire paycheck on rent, you've definitely been betrayed by the system. And if you can't get out of homelessness because politicians refuse to properly address this growing problem, then you know the system is rigged against you. Do you agree or not? We look forward to reading your comments. Please subscribe to this channel, and thank you for watching.